Yvonne, Janet Edmonds, home delivery in Alfred Street, Bangalore, southern India. My parents were Constance Mabel Coombs and Patrick Fitzgerald Coombs. My mother was 18 at the time, and my father was 37. I have 2 sisters, 1 brother. One brother, the eldest, died a couple of years ago, and I still have 2 sisters, Winsome and Annette. And then we moved from Alfred Street to 7 Rose Lane, well, a big house with 2 bedrooms, a veranda and a small study and a bathroom, no plumbing. But we used to get a tub in to have our shower, a water bath. It was, we didn't have a lot, because my father then moved to Shimoga, which was slightly north of Bangalore. He was the inspector of post and telecommunications. And then he joined the army, so we never got to see him again after that. Well, he was taken prisoner of war and missing in action. He worked on the Burma Railway and then taken to Changi prison in Singapore, where he died. But Mum, in the meantime, hadn't heard or hadn't got any money at all from him while he was missing in action. And she used to do perms and used to do a lot of sewing and help with various concerts, balls. She'd make costumes and she'd make decorations, so in that way she was able to get a bit of money for us 4 children. And she got very friendly with Mr. and Mrs. The parson and his wife from Methodist Church, who helped us a lot growing up. We managed to go a scholarship to a good school, Bishop Cotton's Girls' School. All 3 of us went to the school, and I was there from the age of 6. I started later because I was pretty sick, so I started later, but went through school. We were in a uniform and blazers. It was quite an exclusive school, and I became junior prefect in middle school, a senior prefect in high school, and then captain of school at the last year. I never liked school. I used to hide my uniform so I wouldn't have to go, but eventually I did go. But I was a fairly average student. I guess I never really tried hard enough, but I managed to get through to the very end. So it was and I loved sports, athletics. I was captain of sports. I ran for Mice Estate, the 100 yards and the 220 yards. We would walk to school, which at the time seemed far, but when I look back, it's not at all, really, because we would be able to go home for lunch and go back to school and then go home again and then go back for games, so it wasn't that far away. So we all went to the same school and finished there. I wouldn't say we were well off at all. We were, I suppose, better than some, because we did have some friends and neighbours that Mum used to help out a lot, share our food, basic food, but we were never hungry. We were hardly ever sick. We had a charmed life, really. We had a lot of, but mostly English friends, Anglo-Indian friends, not so many Indians at the time, because at that time, this is pre-Raj days, and we still felt British, I suppose, but being the 3rd generation born out of the United Kingdom, we still hung on to that British side of things. But in 1947, when India became independent, it did change a lot. There was a lot of rioting, a lot of problems, but it didn't seem to affect us. Even the war didn't really affect us. We were too far away. But we went through a very happy childhood. We had lots of friends, we had lots of parties, a lot of dances with live bands, and it was a very enjoyable time of life that we had. You know, even going to dances, I mean, the group of us would walk and walk home. Occasionally we would afford, if we were going for a ride somewhere, we'd hire a carriage, a horse-driven carriage, which we loved, or a rickshaw occasionally, but we were a bit upset that this poor guy was pulling us along. And bicycles we were able to hire occasionally, but most of the time we walked, even to dances, and we managed to get there without too much trouble. I can't remember anyone really. Even in India, when we used to go to all the dances and things, you know, the boys used to drink the local stuff, whatever that was, and they might go out and they'd be sick and all the rest of it. I remember, well, I think I slapped someone's face once when at a dance because he got too close to me and picked me up or something. But I don't even remember he was drunk. But I remember smacking his... Oh, Steve Katchik, he was the captain of the boys' school just across the road from me. And it was holding hands and maybe the first kiss with Steve. Big promises were made, you know, he was finishing school before I. And he was going back to the UK and going to become an aeronautical engineer and would send for me. So we kept in touch when he left a little bit, but I then got other boyfriends and had better fun, and it just didn't happen. Anyone that wanted to go could go. We had a live band, we had a hall, and we'd more or less sit around the edge of the hall. There were some tables, but they were mostly hardly ever used because we were up dancing. The Barring Institute was a bit more upmarket, and much better facilities, a huge floor with two sides where a lot of tables were put with a band again. And we'd have various competitions as well at the dances, which was a lot of fun. Oh, it was cold. It was cold because we used to go caroling, and we'd wear scarves, and fun, absolute fun. And we'd sit out in the front. Well, it was hardly a garden. It was more like a big compound, as it were, at night time. But that was more summertime because we had a fruit called a tati nungu, which we would come around because you could buy almost anything from the house in Bangalore. So we'd buy these and we'd sit out there and eat it. It was like you peeled it, and the inside was just like the inside of a tender coconut, but a lot nicer. And then the man with the big thing, he had a bell on the bottom of this big open glass, and he'd make hot gram and various hot stuff. So he'd come and we'd buy a bit of that. We remember eating all that. We'd play 7 tiles, and we'd play hopscotch, and we'd play basketball, and we played a lot of games in that compound because there seemed to be a lot of teenagers around the same as our age. So, and Mum loved us to be home rather than be out, and she made everyone welcome. So in that way we had a very happy, very lovely childhood. Oh, we're going back. At a picnic. He was my best friend's boyfriend, so that's how we met. And from there, he dumped Margaret, and we started going out. Movies, and he had an old BSA motorbike. We used to court on that, and I'd sit at the back, side saddle, with my legs crossed. And actually I got in a tangle once. My foot was sticking out too far, so that was a problem. But we had a lot of fun. And the boys in Richmond town didn't want to see Rex because he was from a different town, so they gave him a hard time. Well, he was also born in India. He came from a different town than I did. But he was sent to East Africa because his stepfather was the district engineer in East Africa with the railways and harbours. So he was then sent because he was not going to school and giving Mum a lot of trouble. So he and his brother went to East Africa. His brother was put in the mechanical side, and Rex was put into the building side. So they both apprenticed under his stepfather. But then we got engaged in the November, and 5 months later we were married in Patrick's Church. I had to become a Catholic, so it was hard, very hard becoming a Catholic, but it was a beautiful wedding. My sister made my head dress, and we got the bouquet from the hills, the Nilgiris, and then my husband had to go back a couple of months later to organize the trip for me to East Africa. Oh, engagement and wedding ring, yes.
Did he buy that in India, do you know?
He bought me the sapphire one. He first bought me a ring for my birthday, which was an amethyst, topaz, my birthstone. And then he bought me 3 sapphires as an engagement ring. And this wedding ring, of course, which I had specially made, which my daughter has the other 2 rings. But these 2 that I'm wearing now, the diamond solitaire, was later on in Kampala, and the eternity ring also came later. And my bangles, and he would buy me a few really nice gold pieces, which I have, but I wasn't one for jewellery. But we did very well out of it, and he loved giving me presents. I remember the earrings that I have on now. He brought me back from London. I don't know how many years ago that was. And they were for pierced ears, and he didn't know I didn't have pierced ears, so I'll have to have pierced ears.
Your mother, she was happy?
Oh yes, very happy, because she had, of course, met him too. And I think in a way too, she was happy that I had found someone. Even though I'd had a lot of boyfriends, they weren't really into much. There was one in the Indian Army. He was a very nice young man, actually. But Rex, of course, seemed to be more established, and coming from East Africa, he seemed to be wiser. So I think Mum was a bit relieved, though sad, of course, and worried, because it was such a short courtship. Well, first time leaving Mum and leaving India and flying for the first time from Bangalore to Bombay, and had to spend a night in Bombay, which I didn't realize, and I was so petrified that the 2 air hostesses took me home and put me up in a little camp bed and took me back the next day, and I went on a DC-3, the old DC-3, propelled ones. And Rex met me at Nairobi airport then. My husband became the clerk of works, and it was very interesting because the first couple of years in Dar es Salaam, I would go with him sometimes up line in a coach, a railway coach, which was attached to the main train. And we'd go up and they'd put us on a siding, and my husband would go and check all the culverts and the station buildings, bridges, etc. And I would be left at home, and Africans would come with fruit and vegetables, and I had a cook with me, and the cook would do all the cooking, bake bread in an oven underground with coals. And Rex would go off on a hand trolley, the Africans would actually run along the line, pushing this trolley along so that he can stop whenever he needs. And I always remember he'd come home with these animal stories. And one particular one, he said, as they were going up an incline, it was sunset, or sun, he said they were proud of lions across the line. And he said if he'd had a camera, he would have taken a photograph. But he said they had to wait until the lions decided to move off because they could carry on then. He never really shot any big game, but he did used to shoot the small dik-dik, like an antelope, for food for the boys, and we'd get some occasionally. But he then became honorary game warden at the Serengeti National Park and was awarded a medal or something, I can't remember. But anyway, from there we went to Mwanza, and because he was on the deepwater berths at Mwanza, and we lived in 2 rondavels, temporary accommodation, which lasted not very long. And then he met the governor, and a lot of people came out from the UK because this was a big thing. Yes, we had African Christmases. I can't really remember. I think a lot of them we spent in Nairobi with Rex's brother and family. And I remember we used to have also dance. We have dancing in the parties, Christmas parties. And there'd always be an institute or somewhere where they'd have Santa Claus. So we'd go there, of course, also for presents, and we'd have a tree. And because in Nairobi too, it was cold over Christmas. But in Africa, of course, it was hot Christmas, like it is here. And we also had some lovely. We'd be out, on a barbecue on the beach for Christmas, things like that, or in clubs where they'd put up Santa, and for the children. There'd be games and races and all that sort of stuff. So wherever we were, Christmas was a happy time. I can't say I ever was, even though, Kenya, we had all that problems with the Kikuyu. That was before my time. But it had settled down. All 3 territories were still British. They were German, and then Britain took over. And while we were there, they all became independent. So we started really our married life in Dar es Salaam, in a little flat. It wasn't very big, but there were servants, there's everything we needed. The railways had always accommodation and always furniture and things for us, so we didn't really need all that. Met friends, Rex's friends, and we had a great time. Movies and dances and parties, mostly parties. And of course I was very naive because it was so completely different to the life that I knew. It was so westernized that I was very, very worried, But I did manage to get a job. First it was in Standard Bank as a teller. And then in Bruce Limited was a car company. Because every 3 years we'd have to leave and come back to another place, another house. So we'd pack up everything and come back to a different place. So it was a learning curve for me, but it was a good living. We had a good life. We never seemed to want for anything. Not that there was a lot of money. Our first holiday we had to save for the 3 years because we didn't have any money. And then we went to the UK and bought a car and picked it up in Dusseldorf and toured Europe. Then brought the car back on the ship down the west coast of Africa to Cape Town, and then motored up from Cape Town to Dar es Salaam. Some of it rough roads, some of it strip roads, with lots of animals everywhere. Met up with some friends in Rhodesia before we got back to Dar es Salaam. Well, the big occasion, of course, was in Dar es Salaam. I forget what year that would have been, but it was the opening of the Deepwater berth. And my husband was involved because he was with the Railways and Harbours. And he got the opportunity to shake hands with Princess Margaret. And of course, I was there, sitting in the stands, not that close. And he always said that she was tiny, the bluest of blue eyes, with a small waist, but she was a party miss. She loved to go to parties, and the security guard would have to be very careful that she didn't take off. But she had a sad life. Oh, the governor at the time, that was in Mwanza, the Deepwater berths in Mwanza. And again, he met the governor there when they came to open the big ceremony of the East African Railways and Harbours. And I was there, but you know, I was just his wife. So we came from Mwanza, we packed up and had to leave. There's a ferry service to Kisumu, where we were next stationed in Kisumu. That was on the northern end of Lake Victoria. Very, very beautiful place, but small, not a big city. We had hippos in the garden and wild antelopes on the side of us. Iguanas would come into the garden, huge lizards. It was quite wild because we were on the edge, but it had a very nice social, friendly place. We were not far from the local club, which was very English, which had a swimming pool as well. So the children and I were able to walk there and swim. And then when my husband started building a boat in Kisumu, it was a wooden boat, and it was very heavy in the end, so I don't think it worked very well. I did start driving a little bit in Kisumu. I had a little Morris Minor, Rex had the Mercedes, and the children were going to a kindergarten then. And from there, from Kisumu, we would visit Rex's brother and family in Nairobi, which was quite a comfortable drive, 4 hours maybe, through Nakuru. We would always stop on the hills and buy fruit before we got home. And Lake Naivasha was always a beautiful spot where we would hire a boat and have picnics there. So we spent quite a lot of time in Nairobi as well as in Kisumu. Before leaving Kisumu to the bridges in Kenya, it was the only place in Kenya, Kisumu, that we lived in. From there we went away again and went back to Dar es Salaam for another stint, I think, before going to Kampala in Uganda. And we loved it there too, because Uganda's a lovely, lovely place. It's built on hills, and met more friends there, made new friends. We started playing badminton on the lawn, tea on the lawn, and we'd go to various friends' houses and play. The children went to Nakasero School, primary school, and the first few years were lovely until Idi Amin took over. And that was a very difficult time because Obote was away and Idi Amin came in, and we met him on the street, very big, imposing man, and spoke English very well, shook his hand, and we thought, oh yes, this is wonderful. But it turned out to be quite different because he was just slaughtering anyone, anywhere, African, that wasn't his tribe. And even the school, the children's school, was really a place where he murdered all these people. So we were more or less confined to our house. while Rex was still working and had to go in. And every day he'd come home with stories, what he'd seen, and it was just horrendous. It was awful. Asians, they seem to get the most of it, the Indians. Because Indians in Africa always ran the small, what they call dukas, the small shops, and commercial places, and offices. They were clerks. And the Africans felt, well, they should be getting those jobs. But they weren't capable at that time. So that's why there was a lot of animosity towards the Indian. And when Uganda started kicking them out, Britain didn't want them. They all were holding British passports. Britain didn't want them, India didn't want them. So they were being ferried back and forth on planes till eventually, what was his name? The UK Home Secretary, he decided that yes, they were allowed to stay, so they were given. So my husband had to give 6 months' notice. It was an awful time, not nice, but we were able to leave after 6 months. We were able to bring most of our money out in kind and had to leave some behind, but it didn't matter. We were just lucky to get out. And that was the 71, that was 1971. Africa was just amazing. It was such an eye-opener. It's something that I never ever thought it would be so commercialized. And everything, you can get almost anything you wanted there. I'd go into a shop and I wouldn't know where to start. My husband would do all the shopping and I would just stand behind him. Because in those days you stood behind a counter and you said you wanted this, you wanted that, and they would get it for you. And we then got the children they were allowed 50 cents a week as pocket money. And there was a little duka, toy shop, and they'd be able to go in and buy their 50 cent worth of a little toy. 50 cents was a lot in those days, but we enjoyed that. We didn't have a lot of money to spend willy-nilly, but we had a comfortable life. Servants had a car, a good job. I had a job before the children came. After that, I didn't work anymore. So I was able to stay home, so it worked okay. But the trips that I used to do with him on the coach going through bush, I met more Africans that way. But otherwise I was more isolated. It was mostly with the servants I would talk, and they would always speak English. Whereas my husband was fluent in the tribe languages, mainly Swahili, because he would go around in the beginning and say, Jinalaka Nini He, pick up a hammer. Jinalaka Nini He, what is the name of this? And they'll give him that name and that's how he learned from the age of 16. So he was very fluent with Swahili. We would always buy stuff, and especially if we were going away or sending parcels home or something, we would always buy souvenirs, mostly made by the Africans, the carvings and the beadwork and the basketry. They were excellent, even stoneware. In Kasisi, they did a lot of stone. There was stone that they worked on, a grey, very, very good work. But I've given all of that away. We did fly to Bombay and then to Darwin. I got my driving license in Darwin because my brother-in-law was still there. He was with ABC, The Voice, and my sister with her 4 children. So we went there first, and they said to me, get your driving license, a lot easier here than if you went south. So I got my drive. And then we came to Adelaide, because my other sister was here and Mum was here at the time. And then we went to Melbourne because my brother was there. And he was going to get a job for my husband, but it didn't work out. and then he got the job with project manager with the Opera House. And he was there for only about a year, 18 months, maybe 2 years. And he really liked it. One of many project managers, of course. And we went to the first opening of the Sound when they started, which was really interesting because they shoot guns and then cymbals and drums and just to get the sound right. So, but we didn't go to the opening, it was too big. He was working as a project manager, and he met two Greeks who were builders, and the three of them joined the company, Nichols Lane. It was mostly office partitioning, and it was very lucrative. It was good. He had to travel a long way from Sydney because we were living up in the northern beaches, and he travelled all the way down to the southern industrial area in Sydney. But I forget how many years he would have had that. And then he liquidated in the end because it had a bad time and it wasn't doing any good. So and then he had his brain hemorrhage operation, which changed him completely from being he was always a very strong personality, life of the party, being a Leo. And when he had his brain hemorrhage, it changed him and became quite difficult to live with. But up till then, we never had a bad word, we never used to argue, we just seemed to go through life, beautifully. But when he had his brain operation, it became a little more difficult. It became a bit more aggro, and the fuse was very short. But I was working, so we managed okay. Carrie was born in Dar es Salaam, Tanganyika, in 1961. And everyone loved him so much that baby was taken off me and taken through the whole hospital to show him off, which I felt very proud of. And then when Debbie came along 2 years later, when Carrie was born, it was British, still British, right, Tanganyika. But it had become independent in between the two. And my husband felt that because we were the third generation born out of the United Kingdom, Debbie had to be born in a British protectorate. So we went to Kenya, and she was born in Nairobi. So her birth certificates, everything was bought in. So that's how she we were still living in Dar es Salaam at the time, but we went up to Nairobi and she was born. She was born in 1963. So they went to school in Avalon. We had a small unit to start off with on the northern beaches, and they were 8 and 6 and 8 and 10 probably. And we looked around. We stayed in that unit for a while when my husband was having to go into the city and work. And then we bought the house on Bilgola Plateau for $45,000 cash, because we had never ever owned a house. We had never really knew anything about buying a house or mortgaging or anything. But I guess my husband was the one. He said, yeah, well, let's just buy it. So we did. Mistake. We should have gotten to credit, maybe bought another place, but that's looking back on it all. But that was a lovely home. And we stayed in there until I left in 2001, when my husband died. So we had a lot of friends. We had a lot of good friends. We'd play canasta, and neighbors would come over. They had 2 boys, a bit younger than mine. So we had a lot of fun together. John next door had a boat, so we'd go up Pittwater, we'd go fishing and go on park on the beaches and have swimming and picnics. So it was, again, a very nice, and the children went to Pittwater House, which was a private school up in Coleroy Beach, until they finished school. Carrie was more or less done with school. Debbie could have gone on to university, but she decided she'd do a diploma in computer science. And then she left home when she was 18 and got a very good job and lived in the city, whereas Carrie stayed home with us till he was about 27. He was still doing his pilot's license and building his hours, flying hours, so it suited him fine until he was able to get his pilot license. Then he married and he went off, and then Debbie went to the UK, and because she had a British passport she was able to work in Britain. And really Debbie became much more independent very quickly. Carrie did. But he did extremely well. He found it hard, a struggle to study and get where he was, but he did it. And his first flight, I think, was a post delivering, and then it was freight. He did freight for a while, still building his hours. Then he also had some students before he got a job, and he went to Perth. And that was with International Jet. It was a subsidiary of Qantas. And they'd take a lot of passengers, contract work, up to the mines. So he did a lot of flying there. And then he got a job with Virgin and came to Melbourne. Debbie is more fiery. She is, I don't know, different personality, I guess, whereas Carrie is much more placid, intelligent, but very placid. And unfortunately, Debbie has had a good marriage, but Carrie had difficulty with the first. But he's fine now. He's found a nice place and he's happy where he is. Not flying anymore because he had 2 neck operations, so he's unable to fly. But still looking for a job. But he's fine. Debbie has 2, a boy and a girl. Nicholas is 27 and Natalie is 14. They live in Tennessee, in USA. Happy. This time, of course, not very happy during the lockdown, but they're managing okay. And Carrie had 1 son from his first wife, Bailey, who lived with his mother in Newcastle and still lives in Newcastle, and is at this time studying to be a teacher. So hopefully he become a teacher. That was 2001. My husband died in 2000. Came here and with my sister for a while and looked for a house until eventually we found someone suggested, this hadn't even been advertised, come and have a look and see, and I fell in love with it straight away. And I had problems because the real estate chappie kept saying, oh, someone else wants it, you know, will you give them bigger quote? So I said, yes, I will put in more, I don't mind, I want it. And in the end they came back and said, no, I don't think you've got it, someone else is paying the full amount. So I said, yes, I will pay the full amount, and I got it. And that was nearly 20 years ago for $300,000.
And the neighbours are good?
Sometimes. Yes, I have fantastic neighbours. I really have landed myself. I'm very comfortable, well looked after, and I always maintain what goes around comes around. So I must be a nice person. Absolutely. I think I was privileged to do what I have done and lucky to have found my husband, because if it wasn't for him, I don't know what sort of life I could have had, would have had. but everything I've done has been wonderful. The only thing and regret that I have, that he left me so soon. He was only 68 and I was 65, and we had planned retired and coming here together, which didn't happen. But that's life. And from there I've had to make a different life living alone. It was very difficult because I did rely on him a lot. But I think it's made me a stronger person because of it. And I've met some beautiful people along the way, which has helped me in my journey to get where I am. I'm happy with where I am and what I've got so far. And I think I'm in control. I have to work at being fit and do the things I want to do. I love them both, Debbie and Carrie, evenly. And they've come through hard times, but they're happy now. And I hope they'll have as good a life as I've had. And look to the future and just be good people. As children, we grow up as Church of England, and we'd go to Sunday school and then go to church regularly. And Mum wasn't a big church goer, but she always liked us to go. But then when I got married, I became a Catholic because Rex was a Catholic, and I knew the children would be a Catholic. So I went through, I christened them Catholic, and they became Holy Communion, and I did all that for them. And I'm still a Catholic, and I still go to church here at St. Raph's in Adelaide. We did go to a church, I can't remember, in Mona Vale in Sydney quite often. But as I said, my husband wasn't a great, he'd rather go to the movies than to go to church. So,
It's the Ten Commandments.
so I find coming here, because I was very much alone, I only knew my sisters, no one else. So by going to church, I met some really lovely people, and it's a very open, welcoming place to be, and I found very comfortable, and I've still got those friends today. Yes, they did. They gave me that courage, that friendship that I needed at the time, and I suppose steered me in the right direction. No one ever said this is what you should do or not do. I think it was just a matter of following, seeing how other people, there were a lot of women on their own, and they were strong because of it. And I think I learned a lot through church, and having that guidance from above as well, because I always felt Rex was there and still is there, looking after me and making sure I do the right thing. He might not have liked it if I'd married again. I never did. I never, ever. It just didn't. There were a couple along the way that sort of wanted a relationship, but I'm never interested, never. But I used to see my husband, he used to have this beautiful red jacket, and everywhere I went I'd see this red jacket for many years, and it would always remind me of Rex. No, I've been happy, a different lifestyle, but I would have preferred it if he was with me, but wasn't to be. So, and I think it's changed me a lot. No, I think he would have been happy, someone else to look after me. Because I tell you what, the first 3 years was horrendous, was a very difficult time. As I said, he was the upfront person, no matter what it was. He paid all the bills. I didn't know what he was doing or what money. Never bothered, never thought about it. So when I came here, I had to do all that and drive. And being on my own, my son and my daughter came, periodically. My son especially, to get me adjusted here into this house. and came with me from Sydney. He helped me also selling the house in Sydney and packing up. I am, yes. I'm not a happy driver, and I never did drive much because my husband did all the driving. I would navigate, but I have to, so I do through necessity more than anything, drive. And when I first came to Adelaide, I'd have to get the book out and write on a little piece of paper, turn left here on this road and right on that road and blah, 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 blah. But now I get my way around pretty easily. She was in Adelaide and at the time living in the cottage at the back of my sister Annette's house. She had sold her house because she couldn't cope anymore. And this little cottage suited her just fine. And Mum was a very healthy, fit. She played tennis until her early, mid-70s, loved gardening, loved walking. And anyone outside, you know, she'd walk and she'd invite them in for a cup of tea, come and have a cup of tea. And they'd, you know, she was very friendly, outgoing. And it was only really the last 6 months of her life that she became sick.
You the same as your mum, or are you different?
I think the friendliness, the openness, I didn't suffer as much as she must have. When I look back, she must have been hard bringing us 4 children up. But I can't ever remember Mum being sad. She's always bright and cheerful and always busy doing things. I suppose I've got a bit of that, very sort of crafty. Loved doing anything like that, which I too like, and my daughter likes too now. Wasn't a great cook, never really needed to cook. We always had someone to cook. But it was someone that you found comfortable to be with, easy to talk to. And I missed Mum when I went to Africa, especially when the children came. Because in those days there was no telephone, there was no emails. It was very hard. Rex's mother came out to Africa a couple of times, but not Mum. She didn't. But I used to send money home for Mum to help her out. So when she came with the sisters to Australia. And when she met Pop, she had a much better, comfortable life with Pop. So we had a lot of happy times together.
Did your mum have a favourite?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think she probably had more of Annette and Winsome than she did my brother, who sort of left India at the age of 17 and came to Australia and didn't see much of Mum. So I think Annette and Win being closer to Mum even than I was, because I was never really living in the area. Being in Sydney, we could only go occasionally to see Mum. So both Annette and Winsome were the closest to her. I can't remember what year it was when Mum married Pop Seppelt. He was always called, his name was Leo, but he was called Pop because everyone loved him. He was one of the Seppelt families, wine people, but very humble, very nice, and they lived in Keith. And Pop had something to do with the sheep. I forget what he used to do, something with the sheep skins. And Mum, of course, made friends with a lot of farmers, and one particular farmer's wife had a tennis court. So all the people around would gather there on an afternoon, play tennis, and she'd make homemade scones and cream and jam. And we would travel from Sydney, the children were little, in the Mercedes, no seat belts, just the back padded up with cushions and what have you, and the 2 kids would be there arguing, fighting or playing or sleeping. And we'd come through Hay, usually Christmas time, which is very hot, and mostly go to Keith. We wouldn't come to Adelaide in those days. We'd go to Keith because it was over Christmas. And we'd go out with Pop. He'd put the trailer on the back of his old Valiant, and we'd go and cut a Christmas tree, which was a wild cherry type of Christmas tree from the bush. And he'd take the gun and he'd shoot rabbits. My son wasn't that interested in shooting. He liked the guns, but he wasn't interested in shooting. But we had some beautiful Christmases, and Mum would do Santa Claus sitting outside. She'd stuff Pop's pajamas and make a Santa Claus and sit out the front, and the parties we'd have in this big shed, this huge shed at the back. A real Aussie Christmas time, summertime. And we'd dance, there'd be music and just basic food, but I can't remember drink being a big thing. I can't remember. Maybe they did, but I was pretty naive. It went over my head.
Well, Yvonne, I want to thank you for sharing your life with everybody on this short video, and we wish you the best in the future.
Well, thank you, Gary, my best neighbour and friend, and willing to give up time on a Sunday for me. Thank you.